In Wyoming, 1988, a cold case would shock an entire community when the arrest finally came 14 years later. The black Honda CRXX, with license plates reading LIL MISS, became more than just a missing car. It became a haunting symbol that would grip two states for over a decade. Lisa Marie Kimmell, 18 years old, ambitious and beloved by everyone who knew her, was driving home to Montana for a weekend visit when she simply vanished into the Wyoming night. March 25th started like any ordinary Friday. Lisa packed her overnight bag in Denver, humming along to the radio as she folded clothes. She called her mother Sheila in Billings, confirming their weekend plans. She was excited to pick up her boyfriend Ed in Cody before heading home. The drive was routine. She'd made it dozens of times, navigating the familiar highways between Colorado and Montana with the confidence of someone who knew every mile marker. But at 9:06 that evening, Lisa was pulled over for speeding near Douglas, Wyoming. The highway patrol officer was kind, letting her mail the fine later when her debit card wouldn't work at the ATM. He watched her taillights disappear into the darkness, never knowing he was the last person to see her alive. What happened in the hours that followed would shatter families, fracture communities, and leave investigators haunted for years. Lisa's body would surface 8 days later in the North Platte River. But her car, the one with those distinctive plates, would remain buried like a terrible secret. For 14 years, the truth lay hidden beneath Wyoming soil, while a killer walked free among neighbors who trusted him. The arrest, when it finally came, would prove that evil can hide in plain sight for decades, and justice, though delayed, never truly dies. Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Summer sunlight filtered through the Arby's windows in Aurora, Colorado, where Lisa Marie Kimmell wiped down tables with the same careful attention she brought to everything in her young life. At 18, she moved between two worlds with remarkable grace, working in Denver during the week, while maintaining deep roots in Billings, Montana, where her family waited. Her manager often praised her reliability, the way she showed up early and stayed late when needed. Lisa treated every customer with genuine warmth, her smile authentic in a world where service industry pleasantries often felt forced. She saved every paycheck, planning for college while helping her family financially. The phone calls home came religiously every evening. Sheila Kimmell would answer after the first ring, always eager to hear her eldest daughter's voice. These conversations stretched for hours. Lisa sharing stories about difficult customers or funny interactions, Sheila updating her on her younger sister's activities and their father Ronald's latest projects around the house. Lisa's apartment in Denver was modest but organized, reflecting her practical nature. Photos of her Montana family covered the refrigerator, and letters from Ed, her boyfriend in Cody, Wyoming, were carefully saved in a shoebox under her bed. She cherished these connections, these threads that tied her to home even when work demanded she be elsewhere. The black Honda CRX, with its distinctive LIL MISS plates, had been her pride and joy since graduation. The personalized plate was Sheila's idea, a graduation gift that made Lisa laugh and blush simultaneously. It perfectly captured her personality, confident but never boastful, memorable without trying too hard. By March 1988, Lisa had established a rhythm that worked. Denver provided independence and income. Montana provided family and love. She navigated between these worlds easily, unaware that this balance would soon be violently shattered. March 25th dawned clear and cold in Denver, with spring struggling against winter's stubborn grip. Lisa woke early in her apartment, already thinking about the drive ahead. She'd made this trip dozens of times, but she never took the mountain highways for granted, especially in March, when weather could change without warning. Her morning routine was methodical. Shower, coffee, a quick call to check road conditions. She packed her overnight bag with the same care she brought to everything, folding her favorite sweater, the one Sheila had knitted last Christmas, and including small gifts she'd picked up for her younger sisters during her lunch breaks that week. At work, her supervisor noticed Lisa's excitement. She moved through her tasks with unusual energy, humming softly while she restocked napkin dispensers and cleaned the coffee machines. Regular customers commented on her particularly bright mood, and Lisa explained she was driving home to Montana for the weekend. "Drive safe, honey," Mrs. Patterson, an elderly regular, had said while Lisa refilled her coffee cup. "Those mountain roads don't forgive mistakes." Lisa had smiled and promised to be careful. She always was. The afternoon brought a brief conversation with Sheila, confirming details that had been planned for weeks. Her mother would fly ahead to Billings while Lisa drove, and they'd have the whole weekend together. Ed would be picked up in Cody, Wyoming. A slight detour that Lisa didn't mind because it meant more time with him during the short weekend. As evening approached, Lisa felt the familiar pull of home. She said goodbye to co-workers, locked up her apartment, and loaded her bag into the Honda. The LIL MISS plates caught the fading sunlight as she backed out of her parking space, and she smiled at the memory of Sheila's reaction when she'd first seen them. Interstate highways at dusk hold a particular kind of magic. Endless ribbons of asphalt stretching toward home, headlights beginning to pierce the gathering darkness, and the sense of movement toward something important waiting ahead. Lisa felt this magic as she drove north through Colorado into Wyoming, her Honda CRX humming reliably beneath her. The radio played a mix of country and pop hits, and Lisa sang along to songs she knew by heart. She'd always been musical, participating in school choir and church solos, and the car's interior became her private concert hall during these long drives. The miles passed comfortably, marked by familiar landmarks and gas stations where she'd stopped countless times before. Near Douglas, Wyoming, Lisa decided to make better time. The highway was nearly empty, and she pressed the accelerator a bit harder, eager to reach Cody, where Ed waited. The speedometer crept past the limit as she navigated the gentle curves and long straightaways that characterized Wyoming's vast landscape. She called Ed from a payphone during a gas stop, her voice bright with anticipation. "I'll be there by 11, she promised, checking her watch. "Maybe a little earlier if traffic stays light." Ed's voice was warm with affection, telling her about the dinner he'd planned and how much he'd missed her during the weeks between visits. The conversation was brief, but filled with the comfortable intimacy of young love. Lisa returned to her car, feeling even more eager to complete the journey. She adjusted her rearview mirror, checked her seatbelt, and pulled back onto the highway as full darkness settled over Wyoming. Behind her, headlights followed at a respectful distance. Traffic was light but steady, other travelers making their own journeys through the vast spaces of the American West. Red and blue lights flashed in Lisa's rearview mirror at exactly 9:06 p.m., according to the Wyoming Highway Patrol officer's precise notation. Lisa felt her stomach drop, not from fear, but from the embarrassment of being caught speeding and the worry about how this delay might affect her carefully planned evening. She pulled to the shoulder with practiced care, turning on her hazard lights and rolling down her window as the officer approached. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and the chill of high desert evening air. "Good evening, miss. Do you know why I stopped you tonight?" Lisa nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "I was going too fast. I'm sorry, officer. I was just eager to get to Cody to pick up my boyfriend." The officer, a veteran patrol officer named Jim Morrison, who'd worked Wyoming highways for 15 years, noted Lisa's politeness and genuine remorse. She wasn't argumentative or hostile like some speeders, and she'd pulled over safely without hesitation. Her license showed an address in Denver, but she explained she was originally from Montana and made this drive regularly. "I'm going to write you a citation," Morrison explained, walking back to his patrol car. "But you seem like a responsible young lady, so I'll keep the speed reasonable on the ticket." When he returned with the citation, Lisa attempted to pay the fine immediately at a nearby ATM, following Morrison to ensure she understood the process. Her debit card was declined repeatedly, a banking error that happened occasionally with interstate transactions. Morrison could have arrested her for inability to pay, but Lisa's honesty and clear distress moved him to compassion. "Just mail a check to the address on the ticket," he told her kindly. "No rush, you've got 30 days. Lisa thanked him profusely, promising to send payment immediately when she returned to Denver. Morrison watched her taillights disappear northward toward Casper, making a final notation of the time, 9:47 p.m. Casper, Wyoming at 10 p.m. was a city settling into its evening routine. Streetlights illuminated empty intersections, and most businesses had closed except for gas stations, convenience stores, and a few late-night diners. The Safeway on East 2nd Street remained open until 11, serving shift workers and travelers like Lisa who needed supplies for their journeys. An unconfirmed sighting would later place Lisa in this store around 10:15 p.m., quietly shopping in the snack aisle. The witness, a stock clerk named Danny Rodriguez, remembered a young woman with shoulder-length brown hair wearing a denim jacket carrying a small purse. She'd selected trail mix and a Diet Coke, paying cash at the self-checkout. The security cameras from that night would be reviewed dozens of times by investigators, but the footage remained frustratingly unclear. A figure matching Lisa's description appeared on camera, but the image quality was too poor for positive identification. The timestamp showed 10:17 p.m., but the clock was known to run several minutes slow. Rodriguez hadn't thought anything unusual about the customer at the time. She seemed quiet, perhaps tired from driving, but not distressed or frightened. She'd moved through the store with purpose, someone who knew what she needed and wanted to get back on the road. If this was indeed Lisa, it represented her last known location. The store sat just off Interstate 25, the main route north toward Casper and eventually toward Cody. From the Safeway, the drive to Ed's house should have taken less than 2 hours under normal conditions. But Lisa never made it to Cody. Somewhere between Casper and her destination, between the fluorescent lights of a late-night grocery store and the darkness of Wyoming highways, she simply vanished into the vast landscape that had claimed so many travelers before her. Saturday morning arrived in Cody, Wyoming, with the pristine clarity that high altitude brings to spring days. Ed Martinez had been awake since dawn, moving restlessly through his small house, checking the window every few minutes for any sign of Lisa's distinctive black Honda. By 8 a.m., his concern had evolved from mild worry to genuine anxiety. Lisa was never late without calling, and her silence felt completely out of character. He'd tried her Denver apartment repeatedly, letting the phone ring until the answering machine picked up with her cheerful recorded message. Ed's planned weekend suddenly felt hollow without Lisa's anticipated arrival. He'd prepared her favorite dinner the night before, chicken enchiladas and Spanish rice, from a recipe his grandmother had taught him. The food sat untouched in his refrigerator, a monument to expectations that had never materialized. At 9 a.m., he made the decision that would officially begin Lisa's missing person case. He dialed the Kimmell home in Billings, hoping Lisa had changed plans without telling him, maybe driving straight home instead of making the detour to Cody. Sheila answered on the second ring, her voice bright with Saturday morning energy. "Ed? How was your evening with Lisa? Did she make it through all that wind?" The silence that followed Ed's explanation seemed to stretch across the telephone lines connecting Wyoming and Montana. When Sheila finally spoke again, her voice had changed completely, tight with the first edges of panic. "She never came home either," Sheila said quietly. "Oh God, Ed. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." Within minutes, both families were making frantic phone calls to hospitals, police departments, and anyone who might have seen Lisa along her route. The weekend they'd all been anticipating had transformed into the beginning of a nightmare that would last for years. The Wyoming State Patrol took the missing person report at 2:17 p.m. on Saturday, March 26th. Officer Morrison, the same patrolman who'd issued Lisa's speeding ticket, felt a chill of recognition when the dispatcher read Lisa's description and license plate number over the radio. "I stopped that car last night," he immediately reported. "Young woman, polite, headed toward Cody. Nothing seemed wrong, just a routine traffic stop." This information transformed the case from a possible runaway situation into something far more serious. Lisa had been accounted for until nearly 10 p.m. Friday night, but had never reached her destination less than 2 hours away. The timeline suggested something had happened during that brief window. By evening, volunteer search parties formed in both Wyoming and Montana. Church groups, co-workers, family friends, and complete strangers who'd heard about Lisa on local radio stations gathered at predetermined locations with flashlights, maps, and grim determination. The searches focused on the route between Casper and Cody, particularly remote areas where a car might leave the road unnoticed. Teams walked ditches, explored abandoned buildings, and checked every pull-off and rest area along the highway. The Wyoming landscape, so beautiful during daylight, took on a menacing quality in darkness, as searchers called Lisa's name into the wind. Sheila refused to sleep, pacing through her Billings home while coordinating with law enforcement and media contacts. She'd already contacted local television stations, and Lisa's photo, her bright graduation picture, began appearing on evening newscasts across the region. Ronald worked quietly beside his wife, making phone calls and organizing volunteer schedules with a methodical efficiency that characterized his approach to crisis. Their younger daughters watched their parents with frightened eyes, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing the gravity of the situation. By Sunday morning, flyers with Lisa's picture and the distinctive LIL MISS license plate were posted throughout Wyoming and Montana, carried by volunteers who refused to give up hope. The call from Unsolved Mysteries came on Tuesday, March 29th, just 4 days after Lisa's disappearance. With the show's researchers had been monitoring police reports and news wires, looking for cases that fit their format, and Lisa's story contained all the elements that made compelling television. A young, attractive victim, mysterious circumstances, and a family desperate for answers. Producer Susan Martinez explained the process to Sheila over the phone. "We can't guarantee results," she said honestly, "but national exposure often generates tips that local coverage can't reach. Sometimes someone saw something they didn't realize was important." The filming took place in Billings on March 31st, with Sheila and Ronald sitting in their living room while professional cameras captured their anguish. The experience felt surreal, their private nightmare being transformed into television content that would reach millions of viewers. Sheila spoke directly to the camera with the composed desperation of a mother who would do anything to find her child. "Lisa is responsible and reliable. She would never disappear voluntarily. Someone knows what happened to her, and we're begging them to come forward." Ronald's interview was shorter but equally powerful. His quiet strength and obvious pain created a compelling contrast to Sheila's more emotional approach. Together, they represented every parent's worst fear: the sudden, inexplicable loss of a beloved child. The segment included reenactments using an actress who resembled Lisa, driving a similar Honda CRX along Wyoming highways. The production team filmed at the exact location where Officer Morrison had stopped Lisa, capturing the desolate beauty of the landscape and the vulnerability of a lone traveler on empty roads. When the episode aired on April 6th, the response was immediate. The show's toll-free number received dozens of calls from viewers who thought they'd seen Lisa or her car. Most tips proved irrelevant, but each one was carefully investigated by Wyoming authorities, who'd assigned 2 full-time detectives to the case. The national attention brought something the Kimmell family desperately needed: hope that someone, somewhere, had information that could bring Lisa home. April 2nd dawned gray and cold along the North Platte River near Casper. Bob Henderson had been fishing these waters for 30 years, seeking the rainbow trout that thrived in the river's deep pools and swift currents. He knew every bend, every fallen log, every place where fish might gather during the spring runoff. At approximately 10:30 a.m., Henderson noticed something unusual floating near the old government bridge. His first assumption was debris. Spring flooding often carried strange objects downstream, but as he moved closer, the shape became unmistakably human. Henderson's hands shook as he used his radio to contact the Natrona County Sheriff's Department. "I found a body in the river," he reported, his voice tight with shock. "Female, looks young. You need to get somebody out here right away." Within minutes, emergency vehicles filled the area near the bridge. Sheriff's deputies, paramedics, and Wyoming State Patrol officers secured the scene, while divers carefully retrieved the body from the cold water. The victim appeared to be a young woman, approximately 18 to 25 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair. She wore jeans and a denim jacket, clothing consistent with what Lisa had been wearing when she disappeared 8 days earlier. Detective Ray Johnson, who'd been assigned to Lisa's missing person case, felt his stomach drop as he examined the body. Even after days in the water, the physical characteristics matched Lisa's description perfectly. A small scar on her left hand, mentioned in the missing person report, provided additional confirmation. The formal identification would require dental records and family notification. but Johnson already knew what they'd found. The search for Lisa Marie Kimmell was over, but the hunt for her killer was just beginning. As the body was loaded into the coroner's van, Henderson remained by the riverbank, staring at the water that had kept Lisa's secret for over a week. He'd never look at this fishing spot the same way again, never cast a line without remembering what the current had carried to him on that gray April morning. The Natrona County Coroner's Office was a sterile, fluorescent-lit place where Dr. Patricia Williams had performed thousands of autopsies during her 20-year career. She'd examined victims of car accidents, industrial mishaps, and natural deaths. But the young woman on her table represented something far more sinister. Lisa Marie Kimmell had endured unimaginable suffering before her death. The autopsy revealed evidence of prolonged captivity. Ligature marks on her wrists and ankles indicating she'd been bound for an extended period. Rope burns and bruising patterns suggested she'd struggled against her restraints. The sexual assault evidence was overwhelming and brutal. DNA samples were carefully collected and preserved, though genetic testing technology in 1988 was limited compared to future capabilities. Dr. Williams followed every protocol, knowing this evidence might someday prove crucial. Lisa had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and abdomen with a sharp instrument, possibly a knife or a screwdriver. The wounds were consistent with rage rather than efficiency. Her attacker had wanted her to suffer. Time of death was estimated at approximately 6 days before discovery, placing her murder around March 27th or 28th. The condition of the body suggested Lisa had been kept alive for several days after her disappearance on March 25th. During those days, while search parties combed Wyoming highways and her family made desperate television appeals, Lisa had been held captive by someone who intended to kill her from the beginning. Dr. Williams completed her examination with professional detachment, but privately struggled with the case's brutality. In her written report, she noted the victim's youth and the excessive violence involved, recommending immediate consultation with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. As evidence was cataloged and sealed, investigators faced a grim reality. They were no longer searching for a missing person, but hunting a sadistic killer who might strike again. News of Lisa's murder spread through Casper, Billings, and Cody like wildfire, carried by radio reports, television broadcasts, and the informal networks that connect small communities. Parents who'd followed the search with detached sympathy suddenly felt the cold reality of vulnerability. If this could happen to Lisa Kimmell, it could happen to anyone. Churches throughout the region organized vigils and prayer services. St. Anthony's Catholic Church in Billings was filled beyond capacity on April 5th, with Lisa's family sitting in the front pew surrounded by hundreds of community members who'd never met them but shared their grief. Father Michael Rodriguez delivered a homily about senseless loss and the mystery of evil, but his words felt inadequate against the magnitude of what had happened. The congregation sang Amazing Grace, while Sheila clutched Ronald's hand. Their younger daughters pressed between them. High schools implemented new safety protocols overnight. Students were no longer allowed to walk alone to parking lots, and evening activities were canceled or heavily supervised. Parents who'd once encouraged independence now insisted on knowing their teenagers' exact locations at all times. The Wyoming State Patrol increased highway patrols, particularly along the route Lisa had traveled. Troopers stopped at gas stations and restaurants, asking about suspicious customers or unusual incidents during the time of Lisa's disappearance. Local newspapers struggled to find appropriate language for reporting the crime's details. Editors debated how much information to publish, balancing public awareness against family sensitivity and the ongoing investigation. In Cody, Ed Martinez found himself unable to remain in the house where he'd waited for Lisa that terrible weekend. Friends helped him move to a different apartment, but the geography of the town ensured he'd regularly drive past locations where they'd shared memories, each familiar sight now tinged with loss and regret. By autumn 1988, the investigation into Lisa's murder had generated hundreds of pages of reports, dozens of witness interviews, and numerous searches for her missing Honda CRX, but no arrests. The initial surge of tips and potential leads had gradually decreased to a trickle of unhelpful information and false sightings. Detective Ray Johnson had pursued every possible angle, The speeding ticket provided a precise timeline, but no witnesses had come forward to report seeing Lisa after her stop in Casper. The grocery store sighting remained unconfirmed, and security footage was too poor for definitive identification. Investigators had interviewed truck drivers, transients, and anyone with a history of violence against women in the region. They'd examined similar crimes in neighboring states, looking for patterns that might suggest a serial offender. The FBI's psychological profile described an organized killer who might have committed other crimes, but no concrete connections emerged. The Honda CRX with its distinctive LIL MISS plates had seemingly vanished as completely as Lisa herself. Alerts had been issued to every law enforcement agency in the western United States, but the car never surfaced. Johnson theorized the killer had destroyed or hidden the vehicle, possibly burying it in the vast Wyoming landscape where concealment would be easy. As winter approached, the case file moved from active investigation to cold case status. Johnson kept the file on his desk, reviewing it whenever new information emerged, but assignments to other cases gradually consumed more of his time. The Kimmell family refused to accept this unofficial abandonment. Sheila continued calling the sheriff's department weekly, asking about progress and demanding renewed attention to Lisa's case. Her persistence sometimes annoyed investigators, but it also ensured Lisa's murder was never completely forgotten. By 1989, Lisa's case had joined the growing collection of unsolved murders that plagued rural law enforcement, crimes that generated intensive initial investigation but ultimately defied resolution due to limited resources and lack of witnesses. In the early 1000s, 990s, FBI analysts began noticing disturbing patterns among unsolved murders and disappearances throughout the Great Basin region, the vast area encompassing Nevada, Utah, eastern California, and southern Wyoming. Young women were vanishing from highways, their bodies sometimes found weeks later, sometimes never recovered at all. Lisa's case shared characteristics with these other crimes: victims traveling alone on remote highways, evidence of sexual assault and extreme violence, and cars that disappeared without trace. The geographical distribution suggested a perpetrator who moved frequently, possibly a truck driver or someone whose work required extensive travel. Special Agent Diana Foster was assigned to analyze these cases, working from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico. She created detailed timelines and geographical maps, looking for connections that local investigators might have missed. Lisa's murder fit the pattern perfectly. The remote location, the victim's vulnerability, and the killer's apparent confidence in disposing of evidence. Foster visited Wyoming in 1992, meeting with Detective Johnson and reviewing Lisa's case file in detail. She confirmed that Lisa's murder shared significant similarities with at least 6 other unsolved cases, suggesting the work of a single perpetrator or organized group. "Your killer is highly organized," Foster told Johnson during their consultation. "He's comfortable with violence, knows the area well, and has a system for disposing of evidence. This wasn't his first victim, and it probably wasn't his last." The Great Basin serial killer theory generated renewed media attention and additional resources for the connected cases. Sheila felt a mixture of hope and horror. Hope that her daughter's case might finally be solved, and horror at the possibility that Lisa was just one victim among many. However, the theory also complicated the investigation. Resources were spread among multiple jurisdictions, and the sheer scope of the potential crime spree made focused investigation difficult. While Lisa's case moved through official channels with decreasing urgency, Sheila Kimmell waged a private campaign that would continue for years. Her weapon was the written word: letters to governors, senators, television producers, and anyone else who might bring renewed attention to her daughter's murder. Each letter followed a similar pattern: a brief description of Lisa's character and aspirations, the circumstances of her disappearance, and a passionate plea for continued investigation. Sheila maintained detailed files of her correspondence, tracking responses and following up with additional letters when officials failed to respond. Her dining room table became a command center covered with newspaper clippings, police reports, and draft letters. She learned the names of every investigator, prosecutor, and media contact involved with Lisa's case, cultivating relationships that might someday prove useful. The campaign expanded beyond traditional advocacy. Sheila appeared on radio talk shows, spoke at victims' rights conferences, and networked with other families whose children had been murdered. She discovered a community of grieving parents who understood her compulsion to keep fighting when others suggested she should move on. Ronald supported his wife's efforts while managing his own grief more quietly. He helped with research and provided emotional stability when Sheila's crusade threatened to consume her completely. Their younger daughters learned to navigate around their mother's advocacy materials, understanding that this work was how she processed her loss. By 1994, Sheila had sent over 200 letters and made countless phone calls. The responses ranged from form letters expressing official sympathy to genuine engagement from law enforcement officials who promised to review Lisa's case. Most importantly, she had succeeded in keeping Lisa's name in circulation among the networks of investigators and advocates who worked on cold cases. Her persistence created a reputation within law enforcement circles. Sheila Kimmell was the mother who would never give up, never stop calling, never let anyone forget her daughter. The late 1990s brought revolutionary changes to criminal investigation through advances in DNA analysis. What had been experimental science fiction during Lisa's 1988 murder was becoming standard forensic practice by 1998, offering new hope for cold cases that had been shelved due to lack of evidence. Detective Johnson, now a veteran investigator nearing retirement, watched these developments with particular interest. He'd kept Lisa's case file active in his mind, if not on his desk, and he understood the implications of DNA technology for the evidence Dr. Williams had carefully preserved 10 years earlier. The Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, launched nationally in 1998, creating a database where DNA profiles from unsolved crimes could be compared against samples from convicted criminals. For the first time, investigators could potentially link crimes across jurisdictional boundaries and identify suspects who'd been arrested for other offenses. Wyoming's State Crime Lab received funding for DNA analysis equipment in 1999, and Johnson immediately submitted a request for Lisa's case to be reviewed. The rape kit and other biological evidence had been carefully maintained in climate-controlled storage, and lab technicians believed they could extract sufficient genetic material for analysis. The process was painstaking. DNA extraction from decade-old evidence required specialized techniques, and contamination was always a risk. Lab technician Maria Santos worked methodically through the samples, creating genetic profiles that could be compared against the growing CODIS database. By 2001, Lisa's case had a DNA profile, but no immediate matches appeared in the system. Johnson felt the familiar disappointment of false hope. But Santos reminded him that CODIS grew daily as more states uploaded profiles from convicted offenders. Every day brings new possibilities, Santos told him. Someone's going to be arrested for something else, and when their DNA goes into the system, we might finally get our match. Johnson filed the DNA results with Lisa's case materials and continued waiting, not knowing that the answer was just months away. On June 15, 2002, Maria Santos arrived at the Wyoming Crime Lab to find an alert waiting in her email inbox. The CODIS system had generated an automatic match notification for one of her pending cases, Lisa Marie Kimmell, victim 8841. The matching profile belonged to Dale Wayne Eaton, a 54-year-old man serving federal time for aggravated assault. His DNA had entered CODIS following his 2001 conviction, triggering the system's comparison protocols against thousands of unsolved cases. Santos immediately called Detective Johnson, who was now working as a consultant on cold cases following his official retirement. "Ray," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "We got him." Lisa's case. We got a DNA match. Johnson felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had carried him through 30 years of police work. After 14 years of dead ends and false hopes, science had finally provided the answer they'd been seeking. Dale Wayne Eaton was incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon, serving a 20-year sentence for assaulting a woman in Yellowstone National Park. His criminal history included multiple arrests for assault, domestic violence, and weapons violations, a pattern of escalating violence that culminated in Lisa's murder. Within hours, Johnson was coordinating with federal marshals and Oregon prison officials to arrange interviews with Eaton. The breakthrough they'd waited for had finally arrived, but Johnson knew the real work was just beginning. DNA evidence would prove Eaton's guilt, but prosecutors would need more to build a compelling case. The investigation that had remained dormant for years suddenly exploded back to life, with resources and attention that hadn't existed since Lisa's body was first discovered in the North Platte River. Dale Wayne Eaton's property sat on 47 acres of desolate Wyoming rangeland, 20 miles southeast of Casper. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, rolling hills covered with sagebrush and short grass, broken by occasional ravines and rock outcroppings. It was the perfect place to hide secrets. Detective Johnson, now leading a multi-agency task force, obtained search warrants for Eaton's property in July 2002. Neighbors were interviewed about their recollections of Eaton's activities during the late 1980s, and their stories painted a disturbing picture. Martha Henderson, who lived on the adjacent property, remembered Eaton digging a large hole sometime in the spring of 1988. He worked on it for days, she told investigators, used a backhoe he'd rented from town. When I asked what he was building, he said it was a septic system, but it seemed awfully big for that. Another neighbor, Frank Rodriguez, recalled seeing Eaton burning materials in large bonfires during that same period. The smoke was thick and black, Rodriguez said, had a chemical smell to it, like plastic or rubber burning. My wife complained about the stench for weeks. Ground-penetrating radar equipment was brought to the property, operated by specialists from the University of Wyoming's Geology Department. The radar revealed several large anomalies beneath the surface, including one that measured approximately 12 feet by 6 feet, large enough to contain a vehicle. On July 23, 2002, excavation began at the primary target location. Heavy machinery carefully removed layers of soil and clay, while investigators documented every step with photographs and video. The work was slow and methodical, treating the site like an archaeological dig, where every detail might prove significant. At a depth of 8 feet, the excavator's bucket struck metal. Workers immediately stopped the machinery and began digging by hand, using brushes and small tools to carefully expose what lay beneath. The black Honda CRX emerged from the earth like a mechanical fossil, its paint faded but its structure intact. Most importantly, the rear license plate was still attached, LIL MISS. After 14 years, Lisa's car had finally been found. News crews lined the street outside the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon, on July 25, 2002, as Dale Wayne Eaton was formally charged with the first-degree murder of Lisa Marie Kimmell. The arrest warrant had been signed by a federal judge in Wyoming, allowing prosecutors to seek the death penalty under federal jurisdiction. Eaton had been expecting this moment since investigators began visiting him for interviews following the DNA match. Prison officials described him as increasingly agitated and uncooperative, refusing to participate in questioning without his attorney present. The formal charges were read to Eaton in a sterile conference room, while federal marshals prepared for his transport back to Wyoming. He showed no emotion as prosecutors outlined the evidence against him: DNA evidence, the buried car, witness testimony about his suspicious activities in 1988. His court-appointed attorney, Sarah Mitchell, had already begun preparing for what she knew would be the most challenging case of her career. The evidence against Eaton was overwhelming, but death penalty cases required meticulous preparation and aggressive advocacy, regardless of guilt or innocence. In Billings, Montana, Sheila Kimmell received the phone call she'd been waiting 14 years to hear. Detective Johnson's voice was steady but emotional as he delivered the news. "We got him, Sheila. We arrested the man who killed Lisa." Sheila sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, the same chair where she'd written hundreds of advocacy letters. After so many false hopes and dead ends, the reality of an arrest felt almost surreal. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Are you absolutely sure it's him?" "The DNA doesn't lie," Johnson replied, "and we found her car buried on his property. It's over, Sheila. We finally got him." For the first time in 14 years, Sheila allowed herself to believe that justice might actually be possible. Joseph Francis Dax was serving 15 years for armed robbery when Dale Wayne Eaton arrived at the federal prison in Oregon. Dax had developed a reputation as someone other inmates talked to, a good listener who kept secrets and offered advice on legal matters despite having no formal education. Eaton seemed different from typical violent offenders. He was older, quieter, and carried himself with the wary confidence of someone who'd committed crimes far worse than his current sentence suggested. Dax's criminal instincts told him Eaton was hiding something significant. The breakthrough came during a conversation in the prison library in March 2002, several months before DNA evidence would link Eaton to Lisa's murder. Eaton had been reading newspaper coverage of Wyoming cold cases, and Dax noticed his particular interest in stories about missing women. "You ever been to Wyoming?" Dax asked casually. Eaton's response was immediate and revealing. "Lived there for years. Beautiful country, but dangerous. Easy place for people to disappear." Over the following weeks, Eaton began sharing details about his time in Wyoming. He spoke about the isolation of his property, the ease of disposing of unwanted materials, and his knowledge of remote areas where bodies might never be found. The specific confession came during a conversation about a newspaper article describing Lisa's case. Eaton studied Lisa's photograph for a long moment before speaking. "I knew that girl," he said quietly. "Gave her a ride when her car broke down. Pretty little thing, but she got mouthy when I tried to be friendly. Some women don't know how to show appreciation." Dax encouraged Eaton to continue, sensing the importance of what he was hearing. "Had to teach her some manners," Eaton said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Kept her around for a while, but she never learned. They eventually had to put her in the river where the fisherman would find her." Dax carefully memorized every detail of the conversation, knowing he'd eventually need to share this information with authorities. The trial of Dale Wayne Eaton began on February 23, 2004, in the federal courthouse in Casper, Wyoming. Judge William Downs presided over proceedings that had drawn national media attention and filled the courtroom with Lisa's family, law enforcement officials, and curious spectators. Prosecutor Jennifer Morrison opened with a methodical presentation of the evidence that had accumulated over 16 years of investigation. She began with Lisa's character, a responsible, ambitious young woman who'd never given her family cause for worry, and traced her final journey from Denver to her death in Wyoming. The DNA evidence was devastating. Dr. Patricia Sanders, a forensic scientist from the FBI laboratory, explained how genetic material from Lisa's rape kit matched Eaton's DNA profile with a probability of 1 in 6.7 billion. The jury listened with rapt attention as she described the scientific certainty that Eaton had sexually assaulted Lisa before her murder. Detective Johnson testified about the investigation's progression, from missing person case to murder inquiry to cold case file. His presentation of evidence was thorough and professional, but his voice carried the emotion of someone who'd carried Lisa's case for 16 years. The discovery of Lisa's Honda CRX provided dramatic physical evidence. Crime scene photographs showed the car emerging from Eaton's property like a mechanical grave marker. The preservation of the LIL MISS license plate created a powerful visual connection between Lisa's vibrant life and her violent death. Joseph Dax's testimony proved to be the prosecution's most compelling evidence. He recounted Eaton's prison confession with precise detail, describing how Eaton had admitted picking up Lisa, assaulting her, and disposing of her body in the river. Defense attorney Sarah Mitchell faced an impossible task. The evidence was overwhelming, the DNA unassailable, and her client had essentially confessed to a fellow inmate. The strategy focused on challenging the death penalty rather than disputing guilt, arguing that Eaton's troubled childhood and mental health issues should preclude execution. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. March 20, 2004, marked exactly 16 years since Lisa Marie Kimmell had disappeared on a Wyoming highway. On this anniversary, Dale Wayne Eaton stood before Judge Downs to receive his sentence for her murder. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow spectators watching through closed-circuit television in adjacent rooms. Sheila and Ronald Kimmell sat in the front row, flanked by their surviving daughters and extended family members who'd supported them through years of uncertainty. Judge Downs had presided over many death penalty cases during his career, but few had generated such intense community interest. The evidence against Eaton was overwhelming, and the brutality of his crimes demanded the ultimate response from the justice system. Dale Wayne Eaton, Judge Downs began, you have been found guilty of the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of Lisa Marie Kimmell. The evidence presented at trial demonstrates that you subjected this young woman to prolonged torture before ending her life in the most brutal manner imaginable. The judge continued, describing Lisa's character and potential, the life that had been stolen by Eaton's violence. He spoke about the impact on her family, the community fear generated by an unsolved murder, and the resources devoted to bringing her killer to justice. The court sentences you to death by lethal injection, Judge Downs announced. May God have mercy on your soul because this court has none. Eaton showed no emotion as the sentence was pronounced. He'd maintained his stoic demeanor throughout the trial, never expressing remorse or acknowledging his victims. Sheila felt Ronald's hand squeeze hers as the gavel fell. After 16 years of uncertainty, fear, and advocacy, they'd finally achieved the justice they'd never stopped pursuing. Outside the courthouse, Sheila addressed the media with quiet satisfaction. Lisa can finally rest in peace, she said. We never gave up, and justice has finally been served. The American legal system provides extensive appeal rights for death penalty cases, and Eaton's attorneys immediately began the process of challenging his conviction and sentence. What followed was a decade-long series of appeals, motions, and legal maneuvers that frustrated the Kimmell family and tested their faith in the justice system. The Wyoming Supreme Court heard Eaton's first appeal in 2006, examining claims of prosecutorial misconduct, ineffective counsel, and judicial error. A panel of 7 justices reviewed thousands of pages of trial transcripts and evidence, ultimately upholding both the conviction and death sentence. Federal appeals followed, with Eaton's case moving through the U.S. District Court and eventually to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Each level of review took years to complete, generating additional legal fees and emotional exhaustion for all involved parties. In 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear Eaton's case, effectively exhausting his direct appeals. However, habeas corpus petitions provided additional avenues for challenging the death sentence, and Eaton's attorneys pursued every available option. The most significant development came in 2013, when Wyoming Governor Matt Mead commuted Eaton's death sentence to life in prison without parole. The commutation was based on concerns about the state's execution protocols and the lengthy delay since sentencing, not on any doubt about Eaton's guilt. Sheila received the news with mixed emotions. She'd wanted Eaton executed for his crimes, but she also recognized that life imprisonment meant he would never be free to hurt anyone else. At 68 years old, she was tired of fighting legal battles and ready to focus on preserving Lisa's memory rather than pursuing Eaton's death. Justice doesn't always look the way we expect, she told reporters. But Dale Eaton will die in prison, and that's what matters most. While criminal appeals continued through federal courts, the Kimmell family pursued civil litigation against Dale Wayne Eaton, seeking monetary damages and ownership of the property where Lisa had been held captive and her car buried. Civil cases operate under different legal standards than criminal trials, requiring only a preponderance of evidence rather than proof beyond reasonable doubt. Given Eaton's criminal conviction, the civil case was relatively straightforward from a legal perspective. Attorney Michael Thompson represented the Kimmell family in their wrongful death lawsuit, arguing that Eaton should forfeit all assets as compensation for his crimes. The case sought both monetary damages and transfer of Eaton's Wyoming property to Lisa's estate. In July 2005, Judge Maria Santos awarded the Kimmell family a judgment of $6,200,000 in damages, along with ownership of Eaton's 47-acre property. The monetary award was largely symbolic. Eaton had no significant assets beyond the land, but the property transfer provided an opportunity for meaningful closure. On July 18, 2005, Lisa's 36th birthday, the Kimmell family gathered at the property where their daughter had suffered and died. They'd decided to destroy every structure Eaton had built, erasing his presence from the landscape where Lisa had endured her final days. Professional demolition crews had prepared the buildings for controlled burning. As flames consumed the house, barn, and outbuildings where Eaton had lived, the family stood together, watching smoke rise against the vast Wyoming sky. Sheila carried a framed photograph of Lisa, holding it up so her daughter could symbolically witness this act of reclamation. "This is for you, sweetheart," she whispered, as the largest structure collapsed in a shower of sparks. The fires burned for hours, reducing Eaton's legacy to ash and twisted metal. When the flames finally died, the land looked clean and empty, ready to support new life rather than harboring the memories of violence and death. In the years following Eaton's conviction and the symbolic destruction of his property, Sheila Kimmell channeled her advocacy energy into preserving Lisa's memory and helping other families navigate similar tragedies. Her book, The Murder of LIL MISS, A Mother's Story of Loss and Justice, was published in 2007 and became a bestseller in the true crime genre. The book combined Lisa's biography with a detailed account of the investigation and legal proceedings. Sheila wrote with raw honesty about the impact of violent crime on families, the frustrations of dealing with law enforcement bureaucracy, and the importance of never giving up hope for justice. Proceeds from the book funded a scholarship at Lisa's high school, providing financial assistance to students pursuing careers in criminal justice or victim advocacy. The Lisa Marie Kimmell Memorial Scholarship ensured that her name would be associated with positive outcomes, rather than just tragic loss. Sheila became a frequent speaker at victim rights conferences and law enforcement training seminars, sharing her experiences with investigators and prosecutors who worked on cold cases. Her message was consistent. Families never stop grieving, and cases that seem hopeless can still be solved with persistence and advancing technology. The case's resolution coincided with the golden age of true crime media, and Lisa's story was featured in numerous documentaries, podcasts, and television programs. Dateline NBC produced a 2-hour special about the case, and Investigation Discovery included Lisa's murder in their Cold Case Files series. Each media presentation brought renewed attention to Lisa's story and reminded viewers that every murder victim was someone's beloved child, sibling, or friend. The LIL MISS license plate became an iconic symbol in true crime communities, representing both innocence lost and justice eventually served. Dale Wayne Eaton remained in federal prison, serving his life sentence without possibility of parole. He was suspected in other disappearances throughout the Great Basin region, but no additional charges were ever filed. He died in prison in 2015, taking whatever other secrets he might have carried to his grave. For Sheila, Eaton's death represented the final chapter of a story that had defined her adult life. She continued her advocacy work, but with the knowledge that her daughter's killer would never hurt anyone again. The wind still blows across Wyoming's vast landscapes, carrying the sense of sagebrush and the promise of changing seasons. The highways where Lisa Marie Kimmell made her final journey remain busy with travelers pursuing their own dreams and destinations, most unaware of the tragedy that unfolded along these roads more than 3 decades ago. But Lisa's story endures, preserved in court records and family memories, in scholarship funds and victim advocacy programs. Her case proved that evil can hide in plain sight for years, living quietly among neighbors who trust and accept without suspicion. It also demonstrated that truth has its own persistence, waiting beneath the surface until technology and determination finally bring it to light. The LIL MISS license plate, once a symbol of youthful optimism, became a testament to the power of families who refuse to accept that some crimes will never be solved. For 14 years, Sheila and Ronald Kimmell carried the weight of unanswered questions, but they never carried it silently. Their persistence created ripples that extended far beyond Wyoming and Montana, inspiring other families to continue fighting for justice when law enforcement resources were stretched thin. They proved that victims' names need not fade from memory, that public attention can be maintained through years of silence, and that advances in science can resurrect cases that seemed permanently closed. Lisa Marie Kimmell was 18 years old when she died, but her story continues to educate and inspire people she never met. In death, she became a symbol of resilience, not her own, which was taken away by violence, but her family's and community's refusal to let her disappearance pass without consequence. The black Honda CRX was excavated from Dale Wayne Eaton's property and transported to an evidence warehouse, where it remains stored as testimony to both human evil and investigative perseverance. The car that once carried Lisa toward what she thought was a routine weekend at home instead carried her into darkness, but it also ultimately carried the truth back to light. Justice came slowly to Lisa's case, delayed by technological limitations and the vastness of Wyoming's landscape that made concealment easy. But it did come, proving that patience and science can overcome even the most carefully planned crimes. For families facing similar tragedies, Lisa's story offers both warning and hope. Warning about the predators who move among us undetected, and hope that no case is ever truly cold, as long as someone cares enough to keep asking questions. In small towns across Wyoming and Montana, parents still warn their children about the dangers of traveling alone, about trusting strangers, about the evil that can hide behind friendly faces. These conversations happen in the shadow of Lisa's memory, using her story as a cautionary tale that might prevent future tragedies. But perhaps more importantly, Lisa's legacy lives in the advancement of victim rights, in the technology that can now solve cases that once seemed hopeless, and in the understanding that families deserve answers, regardless of how much time has passed. The North Platte River continues to flow past Casper, carrying spring snowmelt toward the Missouri and eventually the sea. Fishermen still cast their lines near the old government bridge, and most have forgotten about the grim discovery made there decades ago. But the river carries more than water. It carries memory, consequence, and the promise that truth, like the current itself, will always find its way to the surface.